Hi folks, and welcome to today's webinar on the 7 warning signs your virtual team is headed for failure. For those on the line who haven't done my webinars before, I specialise in working with team leaders, senior managers who have virtual and dispersed organisations and help them to overcome the challenges and maximise the performance and productivity of virtual teams. So today's webinar is based on, first of all, my experience. I've been working as a team leader and a team member of virtual teams for about the past 15 or 16 years now. I'm also using the experience of my clients and the ongoing research that I'm doing into global virtual teams. So as we go along, please feel free to ask questions. You'll see that there's the Q&A element there on the screen, so feel free to pop any questions you've got in there as we go. I'll either deal with them at the time, or depending on where we are, I will definitely come back to them at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to turn my video off now so that you can just focus in on the presentation, and I will touch base with you again at the end of the webinar. I hope you find it really useful. So in terms of what we're covering during the webinar today, we're going to start by looking at the current reality for virtual teams. So we'll look at some really recent research in terms of the state of play. We will then look at the 7 most common warning signs that I come across. And for each one of those warning signs, I'll share some strategies that I feel that you can use to recover your team in time if you start to identify the warning signs. So let's look at the current reality. There's been a lot of research into virtual teams over the last few years. And RW3, a company in New York, do a global survey every 2 years. And what they've found last year, an estimated 1.57 billion people worldwide are now working remotely. For some of those, it might be just part of the time, and that could be working from home, working from a remote office, working from dispersed locations, even working from, on the road. So quite a wide range, I find, a variety of virtual and remote teams. Also, they found that 87% of virtual team members identified that a lack of face-to-face contact makes building trust and relationships at least somewhat challenging. And then that lack of face-to-face contact leads to breakdowns in communication, challenges around trust, and therefore often performance issues within the team. And along those lines, research has found that 80% of virtual teams are actually performing significantly below capacity. And Deloitte have identified that 66% of virtual teams are also failing to meet customer needs. And so if you're working virtually, you know that it's challenging. It is a bit of a dire situation, but I think that there are things that we can quite simply do to get the team back on track if you're starting to identify that they're heading off the rails. So what we'll do now is go through each of the 7 warning signs and strategies for each of those. The first warning sign is a reduction in productivity or missed deadlines. And I've found that this is often due to a lack of clarity on the part of team members around goals, plans, roles, processes. So I would suggest that you make sure that your goals and plans, both at the team level and individual level, are really clearly articulated so people know exactly what they're working to when they're working remotely. Also, really clear role descriptions. I find that I need to provide more detail in role descriptions for those who are working remotely, because the lack of clarity often means that tasks do fall through the gaps, or there is overlap in roles which creates tension. All of that leads to reduction in productivity and perhaps missed deadlines. Processes are the other area where I think having more clarity and focus can really help the team. This is interesting research from 2009 where they found a correlation between the clarity of processes that you have defined in the team and team performance. As you can see, team performance increases even with distance if you've got really clearly articulated processes. And obviously the opposite is true. If your processes aren't clear, your team performance is going to decrease with distance. So that's the first of the warning signs. The second one is that there's apathy or a lack of involvement. What I've found is that if there's insufficient connection between individual team members and the rest of the team and the team leader, they can become lost or disengaged from the team. And the research undertaken by RW3 last year actually found that team members who don't participate in virtual meetings become increasingly excluded and isolated from the team. And I've seen that myself with client teams where the most remote team members feel like, oh, there's no point in us dialing in for, an online team meeting because that doesn't really relate to us. But they are the same people who also said, I don't feel a part of the team. I feel like I'm excluded. Now, for individual team members, I would also suggest that you manage them by outcomes and that you work with them to identify what are their objectives, what is it that they're working towards achieving, collectively making a plan. They then know what they need to go away and implement, and that you have regular contact with them and touch base with them on a regular basis to keep them connected, one, to the team, but also two, to what it is that they need to achieve. And that also then in turn assists with productivity. Because of course, you can't manage people by looking at what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. They need to be really quite self-guided. I also suggest that you very deliberately reach out and contact each one of your team members frequently and focus on those most remote, because they are the ones who are most in danger of falling off the radar. And have some purely social conversations. Take a little bit of time to develop a personal relationship, which will then help you to maintain those connections. And if you can have face-to-face time with your new starters, that will go a really long way to building relationships and to building their connection to the team. If they can meet team leader, other team members, they will have much stronger bonds there. And for the team as a whole, I suggest that you do what you can to promote collaboration. So get people in different locations working together on projects or sub-projects. That means they have to actually communicate and work together to achieve things. Don't be afraid to use social media. I actually heard last week about a team of paramedics who are all out on the road are using Snapchat to keep in contact with each other just for those incidental conversations throughout the day. And they're finding that that's really helping with the connection to the team as a whole. What I mean by play games is a couple of things. One is during your team meetings, do a little bit of team building to help people feel connected to each other and to the team as a whole, but also maybe create some little competitions within the team from time to time to increase the motivation, increase the connection. Train your team members for collaboration. So if you're using particular collaborative tools, make sure they know how to use those tools. I find that a lot of the teams I work with have members who have no idea about the full capacity of the tools that they have or how to use them. And so they're scared to use them and therefore aren't collaborating as much as they need to. And this is an interesting point. This has actually come from a researcher from Harvard, and he suggests that you have role clarity but task uncertainty. I talked before about having process clarity, but the task uncertainty here is really around allowing individual team members to have some creativity, to have some autonomy in terms of the way in which they perform their role. And I find that if that is the case, they will be much more likely to be motivated and therefore empowered to perform their roles and to stay a part of the team. So that was the second warning sign. Moving on to the third one, and that is trust. If your team members don't trust each other, I've found that trust is the make or break of a virtual team. And if there isn't sufficient trust, deadlines are missed, miscommunication occurs, and tension builds along the way. Because in a virtual team, the type of trust that we have is known as swift trust or cognitive trust. It's that trust that's based on the assumption that, well, Joe has this role in the team. Joe was successful in getting that role. She obviously has the skills to do the job. Therefore, I will trust her to perform that role. but it's a very, very fragile style of trust. And so one wrong move, one breakdown in communication, one failure to follow through on that task, and the trust is broken. So what you need to do is to move past the swift trust, use that as a leverage, but then build real, enduring, or what we call affective trust, which is that trust that we have when we build strong relationships with our colleagues. And the way that I suggest that this is best done is through needs and expectations conversations. So we all go to work every day with a set of needs and expectations around our work, our team, our manager, the organisation we work for. If those needs and expectations are not met, no trust is built, or if it has been built, the trust will be broken. But how often do we actually let people know what we need and expect from them? So to give you some examples, needs are fairly fundamental. So a lot of us have similar needs. So it might be that we have need to earn money to put food on the table. We need a sense of belonging, and we need job security. Our expectations, though, can vary widely. For some people, they might expect that work is going to be fun. For some, they might expect that they're going to have daily contact with their team leader. For some, they might expect that they're going to be promoted within, the first 6 or 12 months of being in a particular role. They could vary widely, and the only way to find out about people's expectations is to ask them. So I suggest with your remote team members, start by asking them, what do they need and what do they expect from you? And then you let them know what you need and expect from them. Look, there might be some negotiation, and there might be some surprises in the conversation, but what it will really help you to do is to set that benchmark or foundation, if you like, from where you can then build the trust. So that's warning number 3. On to warning number 4, which did come back up as a bit of a warning early. I apologise for that. This one is around conflict or hostility between team members. And this is, I suppose, the next step on if the trust hasn't been built and if things are allowed to deteriorate. The first thing I would mention is that if you're getting any inkling whatsoever that there is conflict or hostility building, to get in early and deal with it early, because it never gets easier and it doesn't often go away either. It usually builds and becomes more complex over time. And look, the conflict could be due to breakdowns in communication. It could be a lack of trust or a loss of trust, or it could be around cultural differences as well, totally unintended, but perhaps because people are unaware of some of the cultural differences within the team. So do get in early, deal with it as soon as it starts to surface, and involve those people where there is tension in working out the best way for them to work together and finding out what they each need to be able to work past that conflict and hostility. And a few lessons here from Yale University, who've done quite a lot of research into virtual teams over the last couple of years. They first suggest that you build a collective identity. And what that really means is that you work with your team members to build perhaps a team vision, so everybody knows what they're working towards and feel that they're working together towards that. Also, team values or ground rules or social contract, but something that binds the team and helps team members to identify, what are the accepted behaviours within the team. Accept vulnerabilities, remembering that if people are working remotely, it's challenging. Everybody's different. Nobody is totally free of challenges and vulnerabilities. So keeping an open mind, and where things are starting to become a little bit tense, not to make assumptions, to really, I suppose, accept we are all human, try to find out why things are occurring, and when a problem does arise, evaluate your communication first. Because of that lack of face-to-face contact when you're working remotely, unless you are having a lot of face-to-face meetings or online video meetings, it does really create a lot of challenges around communication. And so it often is at the core of problems and tensions within the team. So I would suggest the first thing you look at is your communication processes and how you can improve those to deal with that current situation, but also to ensure that other situations don't arise. So that's warning number 4. Now, warning number 5 is a mixture of confusion about assignments, mixed signals, and unclear relationships. Now, this relates back to communication again. It is often aligned with a lack of trust and often the precursor to conflict and hostility. And it relates back to the importance of clarity around goals, plans, and roles. If there are confusion, it's around who's doing what, who's responsible for what, when do things need to be done, who's working together on what. If left unchecked, it is going to lead to conflict and to missed deadlines. So on this one, I've got a few tips from TED's tech team, who are a highly dispersed team. They're the technical team that bring the TED Talks to us, and I'm sure that those online have heard of TED Talks, hopefully have actually viewed TED Talks before. So what they suggest is, if you can at all, get together in person so that you can build relationships, build trust, but also get to know each other and get to know each other's communication styles. During that time, though, either face-to-face or you can do this separately, coming back to the expectations, making sure you're aware of everyone's expectations, but also be very clear. If you are the team leader, be very, very clear on your expectations around deadlines, around who's working on what, around the way in which people are working together and assignments are actually completed. Have a standing meeting. So I would suggest you have regular whole team meetings. I personally have a video meeting every Monday, and that's a weekly update. We then use social media on a daily basis to keep a track of where all of our tasks are. But if you can have a regular meeting where everybody attends if possible, where you talk about sort of what's coming up, who's working on what, you know, what the areas of focus and priorities are at the time, it tends to really reduce the chance of confusion. Also, review your tools. Think about, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment, but have a look at the various communication tools you are using and make sure that the tools that you are using are appropriate for the communication processes. For example, do you have collaboration tools where those who are meant to be working together can actually go to the same place and work together on a particular task? How are you ensuring that information is getting out across the team? What tools are you using for meetings? And as I mentioned, I'll pick up on this again in a moment. And I would suggest that you invest in video conferencing. TED do as well. And that comes back to having the value of face-to-face, if you like, simulated face-to-face conversation where you can, see the body language as well as just picking up on the words. It really enriches the communication. And so people get the context of what's being discussed, not just the content. And a few other top tips that I have for this one comes back to a couple of things I've already mentioned. Involve the team in developing a vision and social contract, so then everyone knows, what is it we're working towards and how we're going to work together to achieve that. Do meet face-to-face if you can, if possible at all. Otherwise, video. Clarify your roles, but also your interdependencies. Who needs to be working with whom on which task, etc. And I suggest you invest some time in team building, even if it's just a little 5-minute team building activity at the beginning of your team meetings, whether they are, scavenger hunts, trying to, asking people to find out about each other, people to, share little fun facts about themselves, anything that you can do to help people to get to know each other, but also to create that sense of team. So that's number 5. Number 6 is decisions are misunderstood or not carried through effectively. And the root cause really of this one is a lack of clear communication, which is so often what brings down virtual teams. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that it's important to look at the tools that you have and make sure that you're using the right tools for the right purposes. So to give a little bit more clarity around that, communication tools vary in richness. From low richness being those tools that include just the words, just the text. So it might be policy documents, guidelines, procedures, emails. Now, these tools are really just useful for information sharing for a couple of reasons. One is they're asynchronous, so you're not getting interactive communication. And two, it is just the words. And so if we go right back to research that Albert Mehrabian did back in the 60s and 70s, if we look at interpersonal communication, the words themselves only make up 7% of the communication process. The rest is made up of 38% tone and 55% body language. And so if we've only got the words, we can, it leads to so many breakdowns in communication and miscommunication. And I would suggest that email is probably the most overused and ineffective tool for a lot of the communication we need to be doing in virtual teams. It leads to so many breakdowns in communication. So if you can find other ways to have those more interactive conversations, I would suggest that you do that. Because if we look then at moderate communication tools in terms of richness, we've got teleconferences, we've got telephone, document desktop sharing, discussion boards, and instant messaging. So these are much more synchronous. People tend to be using these in real time. And then, of course, with teleconference and telephone, you've got your tone of voice as well as the words. And so wherever there's any complexity, whether there needs to be interactivity in the communication, I would suggest you go for at least moderate richness tools. And then your high richness tools are, of course, your video and your face-to-face, because they are synchronous, and you've got your non-verbals as well as the words. And whenever it's sensitive, whenever it's complex, I would suggest you go for video conference at least. So if you can use video conference for your team meetings, they will be more effective, and I'll show you a little bit of research in a moment about why that is the case. Anything like tension or conflict, feedback. I know of feedback discussions that have been undertaken over the phone, have led to breakdowns in communication, and have actually led to people resigning from their roles. So if it's feedback, particularly if it's constructive feedback, I'd suggest your video conference. Now, a bit of research, just some interesting statistics on what virtual teams, successful virtual teams, tend to be using. Some research from 2015. So 84% of remote teams are using instant messaging every day. And I have to say that I do, and I find it's a great way just to have that incidental conversation happening throughout the day. 51% of teams also have daily phone calls, whether that's one-on-one or a conference call. 70% use project management software. Again, I do for my teams, and I find that it's really useful for everybody to be able to go in and keep a track of where everything's at, see who's responsible for what, etc. Using team collaboration software, again, for the same reasons. People are then working together, sharing documents, etc. And it's really quite clear in terms of who's working on what and where things are up to. And when visual nonverbal communication is important, 50% are using screen sharing regularly. 8% said they rarely use screen sharing, while no team said that they never use it. And only 39% are using video calls regularly, which is actually, I think, a little bit of a sad fact. And 16% are saying they rarely or never use it. I find that it improves the communication so much. And there are, a lot of tools on the market now that are much more stable. And often really quite inexpensive as well. And while I don't promote particular tools here, if you did want to find out about some of the tools that you may not be aware of, just let me me know. I've got my email at the end of the webinar. And the most used tools are instant messaging and screen sharing. So I think it's important for you as a team to look at what tools do you have, what are you using for what, to actually agree on which tools to be using, and make sure your staff are trained. Because as I mentioned earlier, I find that one of the drawbacks is staff either don't know the full capacity of the tools or are afraid to use them because they haven't been trained in using them. So just some top tips: agree on how to communicate, select your tools really wisely. I would suggest you find alternatives to email. I know of one Australian totally virtual organisation who have got rid of internal email altogether and are just using an instant messaging tool for all of their internal conversation. They set up discussion groups, etc., and they've found that it has improved the communication, but also the productivity and efficiency of the team. Invest in video conferencing if at all possible, and even develop some agreed communication protocols. It might be around response times to electronic requests. It might be about, you know, meeting attendance, the way in which you operate your meetings, etc. But they can really make a big difference. And speaking of meetings, that's the last warning sign. If your team meetings are ineffective, I so often hear complaints about the inefficiency, the ineffectiveness of online meetings. But it's extremely important, if you want to operate as a team, to come together as a team. And if you can't come together face to face, online meetings are the best way to go. If you're using teleconference though, you'll find this very interesting. Some research from Harvard that looked at what are employees actually doing in a conference call. So 65% are doing other work, and it's because there's not that visual, well, one, visual stimulation, but also two, visual interaction. So people become a little bit distracted, but also have the ability to work on other things. Sending emails, eating or making food. I can't believe going to the restroom. Texting, checking social media, playing video games, even online shopping, exercising, or even taking another phone call. I'm not sure whether you know what your team members are up to, but that says to me that, you know, if our meetings are via conference call or teleconference, they aren't effective because people aren't actually engaged in the meeting. So to make your team meetings more effective, I would first of all suggest that you do have video at least, or if you can, get together in person. I would also suggest that while you are meeting, look at how you can engage your team members. Get them involved. Ask them questions. Ask different team members to present different agenda items. Have an agenda. Send it out beforehand so people are coming prepared, so that it's not just a one-way communication process. The more engaged they are, the more you will all get out of the meeting. Invest in your video conferencing, as I've already mentioned, and have a standing video meeting. Keep it organised, keep it short, sharp. I actually find that online team meetings do need to be short and sharp, otherwise people do tend to fade away. And if you are leading it, I suggest that if you can, you share the task of chairing the meeting. And if you do, make sure it's really explicitly chaired, so that people, you know, using people's names, specifically asking people for comments, summarising as you go, so everybody's with you as the meeting goes. And if you can't get together, see what you can do to replicate the face-to-face meetings. So this is a picture of a virtual team who meet on a regular basis via video. As you can see, they have team lunches this way as well. All of the other locations are up on the screens there. And so they run it like a team meeting or a team lunch, and replicate as much as they can. They all bring their food to replicate the face-to-face as well as they can. So they are the 7 signs. So going back over the 7 signs, the first is productivity reduces or deadlines are missed. The second is apathy or lack of involvement, having lost team members. The third is a lack of trust. The fourth is conflict or hostility in the team. The fifth is confusion or missed signals or unclear relationships. 6 is decisions not being understood or carried through. And 7, ineffective team meetings. So if you are feeling as though you're heading for some of these, you're noticing some of these signs, feel free to get in contact. I'd be really happy to run through what you're experiencing at the moment and provide you with some specific tips on what you can do to get the team back on track. And I'll just check, there are a couple of questions there which I will cover off now. So one of the questions is around, I had a slide around team vision and social contract or values. The question is, what if you can't meet face-to-face? I found that you can still do this quite effectively via an online meeting. Perhaps one person has, either you have an interactive whiteboard. I often use, say, PowerPoint Online, where people can get in and work together on something, or for one person to have a whiteboard with the video on it, and will be scribing as people are talking and having input. And so you can still come up with a collective document. You can then share that around and get everybody's input. What tools do you suggest? I mentioned that I prefer not to specifically suggest tools. But if you would like to find out specifically about tools, just get in touch with me. My email is on the previous slide, korrine@odconsulting.com.au. And the next one, the last question here, there are no others, no. Meeting times when you're in different time zones, that's always a challenge. I collaborate with people in Canada, the UK, Asia, and so it can often be a challenge. So what we try to do is, first of all, find the mutually most agreeable time for everybody. It's not going to suit absolutely everybody. So I first of all get people's input to it, but then see if you can rotate it so it's not the same person all the time having to deal with the very late night or the very early morning. So no other questions. So just to wrap up, thank you very much everybody for being online today. I hope you have found that useful, and feel free to let me know if you would like a recording of the webinar. It will actually go up onto the leadingvirtualteams.com.au. We have the URL there, up onto the website probably early next week if you wanted to either have another look at it or share it with some of your colleagues. So all the very best. As I mentioned, if you are encountering any of those warning signs, feel free to get in touch. I'm happy to talk that through with you, and good luck with employing the strategies that we've covered here today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.